Hey my glam girls, welcome back to my channel. It's Chelsea, where we talk about all things glam and all things girly. So today I wanted to talk about cool toned, neutral toned eyeshadow palettes that I think are going to work best for people who have tan to deep skin tones, but really for any complexion. What inspired this is that Makeup by Mario just came out with his new eyeshadow palette that is his neutral to cooler toned color story, and I myself am perplexed as to whether or not I want to buy it. However, one of you guys were like, hey, I'm not interested in this palette, but could you recommend eyeshadow palettes that really will cater to more complexions? And I want to say thank you for the idea, because I think that's a really great question, and this is what this video is about. So before we get into all of that, I just want to say thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I truly do appreciate it. If you are new, I would love for you to click that subscribe button and join the Glam Girl Squad, because we love to have you. And if you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for deciding to come back and support my channel with all of your likes, your comments, shopping through my links. It really all means a lot to me, because you could support any other creator, and I'm so appreciative that you've decided to support me today. So thank you so much for coming back. I'm so happy that you're here, and let's get right into this video. So Makeup by Mario came out with this new palette. I did purchase his very first eyeshadow palette. I have since decluttered it. I thought the palette was nice. I think it's a great neutral to warmer toned, I would say just probably warm toned eyeshadow palette, especially if you're a beginner, you're just starting out, or you're just like, I want something simple that's going to give me those warmer tones. I think he did very well with that palette in terms of choosing shades that could work for a lot of complexions. You've got like deep, rich depth shades, you've got tones for medium complexions, light complexions, and it's honestly probably a go-to staple eyeshadow palette. I had it for a couple of years, and then I decided to let it go because I was reaching for other eyeshadow palettes that had a more similar color story. Okay, then he came out with his Ethereal eyeshadow palette, which I currently have, and when I say I love. This is going to be an honorable mention for this video today. We'll talk about it a little bit later. This eyeshadow palette, I think, leans more cool, neutral to cool, but you've got more so, if I could say, a pink hue to it. That may not cater to everyone, but I think this is a beautiful one, okay? Then we have the color story that he presented to us recently. So this one is what he's calling his neutral eyeshadow palette. I think it leans more cool and neutral, if you will. And when I first saw it, I was just like, what am I gonna do with that? I personally felt like I could probably get use out of maybe half the shades, but even with those, are those shades really gonna be distinctively different against my skin? Meaning that if I wanted to use 3 of those eyeshadows, are you gonna see that I have 3 of those eyeshadows on my eyes, or is it gonna blend into just one tone? There's one picture that he has showcasing on Sephora. I'm showing it right here, and he's showing 3 different eyeshadows on a deeper, richer complexion, and to me it just looks like one eyeshadow. So I am still perplexed as to whether or not I'm gonna buy it. Number one, am I really gonna use it if I get it? You know, is it just gonna be for review purposes, or what would I gravitate to it? And then 2, like I said, if I'm gonna pay $50 for this eyeshadow palette, how much use am I gonna get out of it? And I don't know. Knowing me, maybe, just maybe, I might pick it up during the Sephora savings event, but I will see. However, I do have some eyeshadow palettes for you that I think if you are looking for a color story that's neutral to cool, one that's gonna work for deeper, richer complexions, but even if you have a lighter complexion, you're just like, I just want one that I feel I might get a little bit more use out of, tune into these. So we've got 5 recommendations for you, and in no particular order. I will obviously call out the ones that I love, the ones that I use the most, but let's get into it. So first, I want to recommend Natasha Denona Glam palette. All right, so this palette was the very first palette that had a cooler story to it that I actually liked, because I felt like for me, I was, especially when this came out like years ago, I was just like, cooler tones make me a little uncomfortable. I don't want them looking ashy against my complexion. And kind of intimidated me. This particular palette I loved because we still have some warmer hues in this palette, as you can see here, but the hues of even the warmer tones lean more neutral versus like very warm. And then the cooler tones were not so cool that they looked ashy on deeper complexions. And I loved, loved, loved it. I think this palette will work for a plethora of complexions because you have a couple of deep shades. So this shade right here and this shade right here. And granted, because there's not a black in here, we're not gonna go so deep and smoky depending on the depth of your complexion. But there is a variety of tones in this palette to where if you do have a deeper complexion, you can get a little bit more use out of this palette compared to the Makeup by Mario palette. In addition to, this palette has shimmers, so if you're someone who likes shimmers, you're getting matte shades and shimmer shades. And even like this shade right here, although it looks pretty light and cream, it's not a chalky white. So once again, if you have a deeper complexion and you want to pop open the inner corner of the eye, but you don't want something that's going to look chalky and ashy, this is a really nice tone that will give you that. So even though, like I said, this doesn't have the most depth shades, if you're around my complexion, a few shades deeper, I think you could enjoy this palette. It's a little more than Makeup by Mario's. It's $65, but like I said, you're getting multiple types of formulas within this palette, multiple tones, and you could definitely get more looks with this palette than you will the Makeup by Mario palette. Now, I'm not knocking the Makeup by Mario palette, and though I don't have it, I know that the formula is good because if it's like the first palette, the formula is staple, it's good. There's no qualms with the formula. We're literally just talking about color story in this particular video. Okay, the next one that I want to present to you is by EIM. So this is the Artistry palette number 1, the Balanced Eyeshadow palette. I got this palette last year and let me tell you, beautiful, beautiful neutral toned eyeshadow palette. Now, if you were to hide this row right here, you've got a beautiful array of tones here that are all gonna lean more neutral. And you've got a black in here. You've got a nice gray here. I think this eyeshadow palette is honestly going to be a beautiful eyeshadow palette for any complexion out here. Because you have a black in this eyeshadow palette and this black is rich, I'm talking like liner black rich. Anyone can use this eye palette. Smoke it out as much as you want to, make it like a light type of, when I say a light type of look, you know, if you just want to take one of these shades, run it through the crease and call it a day, you can do that. All matte. And then you get an additional kind of pop of color here with these purple tones here. But I love this palette. This is definitely one of my favorite neutral eyeshadow palettes. This palette is a little more expensive. It's $80, I want to say. EIM sent me one palette and I have purchased 2 other ones like this. They've got this neutral tone and then they have like a really beautiful all metallic one, and then they have another one that has like more pops of color. Formula wise, chef's kiss. So a little more expensive, beautiful formula, very pigmented, and you're going to get way more use out of this palette, especially if you have a deeper complexion. You've got a white in here, but then you also have a cream in here. I mean, I think they did this palette really, really, really well. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it, but it is a beautiful eyeshadow palette. Next, we've got the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude eyeshadow palette. Now, if you have a deep, 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 rich complexion, this eyeshadow palette may not give you all that you need, but you do have a deep tone here, which will allow for you to get a little bit more variety out of this palette. So hear me out. Let's say you want to go and really smoke the look out. Take this tone and you can mix it with these other matte shades to give you a variety of shades here. So if you're someone who likes to mix and match, you can use this one depth shade to kind of get a little bit more of a variety with this palette. Whether you have a deeper complexion or not, even if you have a lighter complexion, you do have a depth shade here that will allow you to smoke this palette out. Also, we've got a few different formulas in this palette. So if you didn't want something that was all matte, you wanted something with a little shimmer, you've got like these fairy dust angelic shades that I absolutely love. You got those in there, traditional shimmers in here. So once again, a palette that's going to give you a bit more variety, different types of looks, that still falls in that kind of neutral, cooler tone. I would say that this palette is definitely going to lean a little bit more cool. Even though we've got this deeper brown shade, it's going to be more of like a neutral, cooler tone versus like deep and warm. But this palette is beautiful. Formula-wise, stunning, like exceptional. Exceptional. Like I said, depending on your complexion, this may not appeal to you, but if you're like me and you like those like pinky tones and you like for them to lean a little bit more neutral sometimes, this is beautiful here. And if you do have a deeper, richer complexion and you don't mind reaching outside of this palette for like 1 or 2 shades to give you a bit more variety, you could do that. But I feel like the rest of these tones, you could definitely work with a little bit more than the Makeup by Mario palette. Even some of these lighter tones here, they would potentially act as your pop shades on like a deeper, richer complexion. If you have a lighter complexion, then you can play around with this palette a little bit more easy and get more variety, obviously. But I think this is also formula-wise stunning. And then with the color story, you could do a little bit more too. All right, moving on. Palette number 4, Danessa Myricks Groundwork palette. If you know me, you knew this one was in here. This was actually the first palette I thought about when I saw the new Makeup by Mario palette, because I was like, if I want to go for a neutral tone eyeshadow palette, ever since this one came out, this is the palette that I've been reaching for. It has literally shut down any other neutral tone eyeshadow palette that I have. Mine is beat up. It's very loved, but this palette, don't get me started. Like this is the person that you're like, I will not cry when I talk about them, knowing that you have so much love for them. Okay, so let's try to speed through this as quickly as possible. But what I love about this palette in terms of use and getting like the most bang for your buck. Oh, one last thing. This palette is $65 as well. Okay. 2 formulas in this palette. Velvet Pomade formula is going to be the formula in the larger pans, and then we have the Shape and Fix powder, which is more of like a traditional powder formula. Velvet Pomade formula is going to allow for you to use this palette legitimately all over the face. I'm talking foundation, concealer, eyeshadow, eyeliner, tight line, mascara, lip liner, blush, like I use the shade Core as a blush, brow product, literally every facet of your face you can use the Velvet Pomade formula for. I have completely done a full face of makeup with this palette on myself. I've also done it on my sister. That video is on my Patreon. If you would like to subscribe to my Patreon, the link is down below. It's $5 a month, and I do post additional content over there. And I've also done a full face of this palette on one of my girlfriends who does have a deeper complexion, and that video is posted here on my main YouTube channel. Legitimately can do any and everything with this palette. And I love that. The Shape and Fix powder formula does have Upsolite in it, so it's going to absorb excessive oil. So if you do have oily skin and you use one of the Shape and Fix powders to set your face, set your eyeshadow with, it's going to help to absorb those excess oils. Okay. In this palette, we've got neutral tones, we have warm tones, and we have cooler tones. And so for me, when I want a neutral look, this is the palette that I reach for, because I have everything in here that I need. And I love, love, love this palette. This palette was made for all complexions in mind and also undertones. So especially if you wanted to use this palette for different parts of the face, undertones are considered with this palette. Absolutely love it. Highly recommend it. Staple, like literally staple for me. Staple, staple, staple. So yes, highly recommend this one. Even though it's not solely an eyeshadow palette, that to me gives it even more like check marks, because I can use it in other places of the face and not just the eyes. And this palette is $65, I believe. The last palette, before I get to my honorable mention, is going to be Natasha Denona Biba palette. Okay, my Biba is broken up because she is well loved, so I'm going to be very gentle with her because I don't want the shadows to fall out. But here's Biba. Biba is, if I could say, like OG neutral cool toned eyeshadow palette. Okay, Biba is bae. Okay, Biba is like, she was the palette that I was reaching for nonstop. What? 2021, 2022. Because I picked up Biba a little late. I was a little late to the game. Because Biba's not cheap. Biba is $125. Okay? So Biba's not cheap. And when I got her, I was like, okay, this is why people love Biba. All right, so the cool thing about Biba is you got warm tones, neutral tones, and cooler tones in this palette. So your cooler tone row is here. And then you've got like your warmer, neutral-ish tones here. Warm neutral-ish, if you will, tones here. I love this palette, okay? For me, this is everything for me in terms of a neutral tone and more cooler tones. And then you've got pops of shimmer in here too. So you've got your matte shades in here and then pops of shimmer. So you're getting a little bit more in terms of variation of formula. And I mean, the shades are pigmented, they blend well, they're just so easy to use, and I love every shade in this palette. This is one of those expensive palettes where I'm like, yes, it is worth it, because you will get use out of it, especially if you just want like, you know, one solid eyeshadow palette that I can rock with, carry it with me everywhere I go, travel with it. Even though it's a little larger, it's very flat, so it packs very easy. I've traveled with it. Mine's broken up because I've used it a lot. It's really just this one shade here. But Biba is definitely one of those palettes where if like I lost it, someone stole it, or it was just completely demolished, I'm repurchasing it. No questions asked. Like I have to have Biba. Have to have Biba. So would for sure recommend this one. We've got a like cooler toned black shade here, so that's really great if you have a deeper complexion, you want to smoke it out. And let me just say this, if you're looking for an eyeshadow palette and you're kind of like, is this gonna work for me and my complexion? If you have a deeper, richer complexion, I'm gonna say this, look for the black or the really, really deep, rich shade. Because if the palette doesn't have that, and you know like, okay, for me to get a smoky eye, I need a black shade, or I need something that's like so close to black, it pretty much looks black. If that palette doesn't have that, then that lets you know like, okay, here's the limitation in this palette. And then go from there, because if you don't have that depth shade and you know you want to have depth with your eye looks, or you at least want the opportunity to have that depth when you want it, then that at least lets you know kind of what you're getting yourself into before you actually get it. And that was something that I had to learn too. Like there's eyeshadow palettes that look great and it looks great on a complexion that's lighter than me, but then I would get it and be like, but why doesn't it look like that? And it sounds silly, but when you're first starting out and you're learning it, sometimes that doesn't click. So for me, I had to learn like, okay, this is a tone that I need so that when I want to smoke a look out, I have at least that one shade that at least will give me that opportunity to smoke a look out, give me a little bit of depth to the look, instead of the look just only being lighter because I don't have that depth shade. So that's just a little food for thought for there. But I think formula-wise, this is amazing. And I think if you, especially if you don't have a lot of neutral palettes, you get a whole lot of great use out of it. Now for the honorable mentions, we've got the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes palette, which is my absolute favorite palette that he's ever come out with. Granted, he's only come out with 3, but this is my favorite. And let me tell you why. Okay, so first, like I said earlier in the video, I love me some like pinky toned types of eyeshadows. And then it's this row right here of fairy dust. That is the formula of this eyeshadow that he has here. Not literally, but that's how I feel. It just makes the eyes pop in the best possible way. And I feel like no matter what your complexion is, all of these shades look good on you. Like if you have the fairest shade to the most tan shade, to the most medium shade, to the richest shade, cooler undertones, warmer undertones, olive undertones, reddish undertones, like these shades right here look absolutely stunning on you. Absolutely stunning on you. Now in terms of like depth of shade, we've got one deep shade here that's not the deepest. So like for me, this tone is going to be a depth shade for me, but I can't go, like it's not gonna like smoke me out, you know, I'm glamming it up for an evening event. It's not gonna smoke me out too much. So for me, this is like a daytime palette for me, because for the most part, I'm going for like lighter looks during the day, nothing too heavy or grungy. And so I'm okay with this for the day. These shimmer tones right here are also really pretty as well. And I like that even though we have some cooler tones in the palette, they're not ashy. So like they still look really complimentary on the eye. And I think this palette is just stunning. Now this palette is not going to work for everybody in the sense of you will only have to, like you could only use this palette to get any type of look that you want. But I think this is a really great complementary palette if you have deeper skin, but you really like these tones here and you're like, I'm cool with like having to reach outside of the palette for 1 or 2 shades, but then I can use this palette for everything else. I just think it's beautiful. The formula is stunning. It's like one of my favorite palettes for sure. So glad that he brought it back and that it is now here to stay, because I really think this is just, in terms of formula. So I'm giving it an honorable mention because it's not necessarily going to be the best for everyone, but I had to talk about it. And it does at least give you, it does give you a cooler, neutral to cooler tone to it. And then it gives you like these fairy dust shades that I just feel are the best. So guys, I hope you found this video helpful. And like I said, I'm not knocking Makeup by Mario's eyeshadow palette because I know formula-wise, it's great. And it's solid. It's just, if you want a variety, if you want a cooler neutral tone eyeshadow palette recommendation that you at least feel like I can use these shades and it will work for me, I think any of these palettes I've recommended you could do very well with, and I think you'd be happy with them. Definitely leave me down in the comment section your thoughts, your opinions, especially if you do have the Makeup by Mario eyeshadow palette that we're referencing here and you have any of these palettes. Let us know your thoughts, no matter what complexion you have. We'd love to hear it down in the comment section below. And if you made it to this point in the video and you haven't yet to subscribe to my channel, I would love for you to consider subscribing and joining the Glam Girl Squad because we'd love to have you. And guys, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope to see you in my very next video. Bye, guys.